All right, welcome to a beginner Mistweaver guide for specifically the range build. So if you already know how the class works and you don't need explainers on how the spells works and how all the interactions function, you just want to know about the build, that video is already up. It's linked below. It'll be in the cards. Go watch that. This is for people who may not be as familiar with Mistweaver. Maybe they've never played Mistweaver before, but Fistweaving just was not super interesting to them and they want a more ranged build. This is the video for that person. So if you have Monk experience, again, go watch the other video. You probably don't need to know all of this. Now, the same disclaimer I had in the last video, very similar for this one. Whenever I call it the range build, understand that you are not literally going to be 40 yards away playing the class. Range build just means all of the healing does not require being in melee, but most of your abilities that aren't healing, so damage, utility, defensive, stuff like that, function a lot better when you're in melee. So the vast majority of the time, even with this build, you will be playing right next to the mobs in melee. But if you're healing and the mobs get dragged away, you don't lose any healing at all. All the healing are done through ranged spells, and you lose literally 0% healing when you have to move out of melee. Now, this build serves as an alternative to Fistweaving, and that's not necessarily saying that this build is better than Fistweaving, it's just different. The reason you will always see Fistweaving at the higher end of keys is because Fistweaving's damage and healing are both technically passive. If you aim to deal damage, you will naturally heal, and if you aim to heal by hitting your damaging spells, you will passively do damage. You don't have to pick and choose, while this range build, you do actually have to pick and choose. The other thing about Fistweaving is it's very consistent. Because a lot of the times in melee, in Fistweaving, you have a set rotation, it means that you are doing a consistent amount of damage and a consistent amount of healing without having to put much thought either way. Fistweaving is also very easy to schedule, meaning the cooldowns are consistent and they're on a fixed timer, and there's not much to it. That means in higher groups and in the world's first keys, they pull around a timer, so they'll pull around a 1 minute or a 90-second or a 2 minute timer, and Fistweaving will always have something up for each one of these specific timers. Now, the drawbacks of Fistweaving is that Fistweaving is very high APM, which a lot of people simply don't enjoy, but also on certain mob pulls like these mobs here, you're forced out of melee, but you still have a ton of healing to do. So in Fistweaving, you'd have to line up all your cooldowns, and if for whatever reason, maybe the last pull went sideways, maybe the next pull is scary, maybe your group's inconsistent, if you don't have your cooldowns, you may not have an answer for healing certain instances where you're forced out of melee. Now, in a high-end push group, the pulls will be tailored to and timed with your cooldowns, and you won't go into a big pull if your healer has no cooldowns. You simply would not have that in the route, right? But in my opinion, this range build is a lot easier. It's more logically compliant in that it makes sense why you do things when you understand how the spells work, and it's very conducive to healing random spikes of mistaken damage, which is very common in pugs. And by no means am I trying to make a build that competes with any of the top end stuff, because I'm not pushing 19 keys and most people couldn't care less to push past like 12 or 13s, and this build will do just perfectly fine pushing to the 13-14 key level to get the cool new mount. Alright, so before I start breaking it down, let's talk about what this build feels like to play. This build has proactive healing and reactive cooldowns. What this means is that if you know a mechanic is likely to be failed because you can see the cast going off and you can see no one has interrupts, or you can see a cast going on someone who does not have defensives, you have a lot of ways in this build to set up healing on that person to try to mitigate the chance that they're going to get one shot or the chance that they're going to die. But the cooldowns are reactive in that all of your cooldowns you press after or as your group is taking the damage. This means that if something surprises you, you pretty much always have an answer, and you basically have like 4 or 5 scary answers before you start running out of things on the 6th scary moment. But very rarely do you get a 6th scary moment within one pull. The other nice thing about this build is that 70% of your damage comes from 2 spells, meaning your DPS rotation is very easy, and also both of these spells have healing benefits and have effectively a cooldown. It's very low APM in dealing damage, and that 70% of your damage are also both ranged spells. So you will do pretty close to Fistweaving damage. Now, it should be about 10% lower on paper. In practice, I find that they even out, and this is about the same damage as a Fistweaver would do. It is less burst damage, though, but because you don't have damage cooldowns as Fistweaving does, you will basically even out your damage over the entire key, and it will be very consistent in that regard. Now, while the DPS is simple and the damage rotation is very simple, when it comes to healing, this build has a ton of options. The basis is basically going to be putting up hots on your entire party, hots that amplify healing and they cause your healing spells to cleave to all the targets with hots, and then it'll be a mix of rotating your reactive cooldowns to top the party up, or going into a channel window, in which case you're basically playing whack-a-mole with health bars, and you're basically always healing the lowest person until there is no longer a lowest person and everyone's full and topped up. The nice thing about this build that's similar to Fistweaving is it is mana neutral, meaning you should be able to heal for an infinite amount of time and never run out of mana. This does come with skill and this does come with a lot of practice, and you will go a lot first. But later on, I'll talk about ways to mitigate that and ways to sort of ease you into learning it a bit. And again, just because it's called the ranged build, as you can see here, this is about as ranged as you play, about 10 to 15 yards away from the mob at the most. But you can see I'm doing a ton of HPS, and I'm also doing passive DPS. I'm not trying to deal damage. My main goal here is to keep everyone alive, because as you see, we're spawning a bunch of statues on this boss, and the damage is kind of just never stopping. But the way that the damage works and the fact that it's such simple spells mean I did 350k DPS without even really thinking about it, which is super nice. Now, whenever I mention any spell, if you want to see where the interactions come from, I will tell you how they interact and what it means for your rotation throughout the entire explanations. But if you ever want to see where the interactions come from, you simply go in your talents in game here and search it. So like whenever I talk about rushing wind kick, you can go here and search rushing wind kick and you can see anything that applies to it. Now keep in mind, rushing wind kick, as you can see in the tooltip, it says replaces rising sun kick. So in this case, you could also search up rising sun kick, and you'll see all the different talents that interact with Rising Sun Kick. So as I go into interactions and the way all the spells interact, because Mistweaver does not have a lot of spells, but those few spells interact in a ton of ways. I won't necessarily point out exactly what node each interaction comes from, but you can easily find that in game, so just know how it works, but you don't need to know where it comes from or why it works. So the highest priority damaging ability you have is Rushing Wind Kick. Over the course of a dungeon, this would be about under half your damage, just under half. And your damage priority, if you're actually just aiming to deal raw damage, is very simple. Rushing Wind Kick hits targets in front of you, and then if you don't have Rushing Wind Kick up, Blackout Kick, when you hit it, has a 20% chance to reset the cooldown on Rushing Wind Kick. So you'll Rushing Wind Kick first, you want to press it again, but it's on cooldown, then you'll Blackout Kick. And then if you Rushing Wind Kick, Blackout Kick, you don't get a reset. You would like to press Blackout Kick a second time, but it also has a cooldown. If Blackout Kick's on cooldown, you Tiger Palm. Tiger Palm makes your next Blackout Kick duplicate itself up to 4 times based on how many Tiger Palms you've cast since you've last Blackout Kicked. So if I Tiger Palm 4 times without pressing Blackout Kick and then I Blackout Kick, it will kick 4 times. Each one of those kicks has a 20% chance to reset Rushing Wind Kick, so you can never guarantee a reset, and it's 20% individual kick chance, so 20% rolled 4 does not mean 80% chance. Those 3 DPS abilities interact perfectly, and it makes sense. You want to cast the strongest one, Rushing Wind Kick first. If you can't and you want to deal damage, you Blackout Kick, and if you can't and you want to deal damage, you Tiger Palm. Now there are other damaging abilities. Crackling Jade Lightning is a 40-yard channel, and it does very, very low damage over time. You will never press this unless it's empowered, but we'll talk about how it gets empowered later. And lastly, but definitely not leastly, is Spinning Crane Kick. The important thing to know about Spinning Crane Kick, it's AoE hitting all mobs around you, and note that the damage radius is bigger than the animation radius. You can see the animation is only half the damage radius. Just keep that in mind for later. But that's all of your damage rotational abilities for Mistweaver Monk. Now before we go into rotations and gameplay, we have to talk about the healing abilities, of which there are not many again, but they have considerably more interactions, so stick with me and feel free to always search up the ability I'm talking about in your talents in-game. If you're confused, you can read through what talents the build has selected, which is obviously in the description. Now the first basic heal we'll talk about is Vivify. You simply cast Vivify and it does healing on a target. At its core, that's all it does. Now every 10 seconds, Vivify has increased healing and it's instant. So if ever you cast Vivify and it just goes off immediately, it's because of this talent node. Now note that this 10-second window is always rolling, even if you haven't used this instant Vivify. What this means is that if 10 seconds have passed, you get a charge of instant Vivify, then 8 seconds have passed, but you never consume that charge. If you consume it then, there will be 2 more seconds till you get another charge. It's not 10 seconds after you consume. It's basically every 10 seconds the game tries to give you a charge of the instant Vivify. And the reason it's important to know this is sometimes you will Vivify, and then a couple seconds later, you'll have Vivify instant again, and you'll be wondering what happened. That's how it works. Now, the next healing spell we'll talk about is Renewing Mist, and Renewing Mist does quite a lot. Now, Renewing Mist at its core is simply a hot on a target that lasts 20 seconds. But Renewing Mist is also a smart heal. And the way a smart heal works is that if it would heal a target past 100% HP, it instead goes to try to heal another target. So if you Renewing Mist someone and it tries to heal them at 100%, it will jump to someone else for the remaining duration and try to heal them as well. And this always prioritizes someone that needs healing. So if 4 people in your group are at 100% health and you have Renewing Mist on one of them, it will jump to the 5th who is not at 100% health. That's how smart healing works, and whenever I talk about smart healing, that's what I mean. They all work exactly the same. Now, Renewing Mist interacts with Vivify in that Vivify heals all targets with Renewing Mist on them. So if you have Renewing Mist on all 5 members of your party and you cast Vivify, all 5 members will get healed. However, the initial target of your Vivify will get healed for considerably more. It'll just sort of cleave a lesser portion of it to all the other targets. Additionally, Renewing Mist has a chance to empower your next Vivify through this talent Zen Pulse, and it makes your next Vivify not only cleave to all the Renewing Mist targets, but do an additional heal to all the Renewing Mist targets, but this one is increased on the more targets that it heals. Another very important talent implication of Renewing Mist is that for the first 8 seconds on a target, Renewing Mist in dungeons is not a smart heal, it's a fixed heal for the first 8 seconds, and it's increasing that target's healing taken by 50%. You will not really consider this in your rotational decision making. It's important to know that when you apply Renewing Mist on someone, you want that person to be injured so that they get the 50% increased healing and it's easier to top them up. And the third healing ability we'll talk about is Enveloping Mist. Enveloping Mist is a long cast, very mana expensive heal over time that not only heals for a ton in just a few seconds, but it also increases the healing that targets take from your other spells by 40%. And of course, there are interactions with both Renewing Mist and Vivify. So firstly, Rushing Wind Kick will automatically cast a Renewing Mist on a nearby target. And also, Enveloping Mist will cast a Renewing Mist on a nearby target as well. Note that it may not always be the same target that you're Enveloping Misting. It could be any injured target nearby. Additionally, through a capstone talent in the bottom here, Renewing Mist's Hot has a chance to cleave the 40% healing increase to allies around it. Again, this is not affecting your decision making, but it's important to know where your healing increases come from. But as you can see so far, your Vivify is your basic heal, but we have a ton of ways to buff the Vivify. So to recap, every 10 seconds, the Vivify is free and heals for 20% more. And the first 8 seconds of having Renewing Mist, targets will take another 50% healing. It'll also cleave Vivify to all targets with Renewing Mist, which has a chance to be an empowered proc. And then also Enveloping Mist will increase the healing of that Vivify by 40%. And also on top of all of that, the Vivify can crit and then heal for double in addition to all of that. And then your final rotational healing spell, as I said, there's not a lot, but there's a lot going on, is Soothing Mist. Now, Soothing Mist is a channel, and it's basically a heal over time, but if you stop channeling, you stop healing. The cool thing with Soothing Mist, and obviously everything has to have a bunch of interactions, is when you're in a Soothing Mist channel, Vivify is instant cast, and Enveloping Mist is also instant cast. Note that it's not free. It's still going to cost a ton of mana, and you're using mana to be in Soothing Mist. But this is going to be the primary way that you Enveloping Mist targets, is by starting a Soothing Mist channel and casting Enveloping Mist while you're channeling Soothing Mist. Now with this build, due to a talent node, whenever you are in Soothing Mist and you Enveloping Mist a target, if you Enveloping Mist another target, you can see the Soothing Mist auto changes targets here. And then if I switch back, it auto switches back as well. This is why sometimes you'll see the Soothing Mist cast bar almost restarting. It's basically just restarting, but at the remaining time, and then it'll get faster and faster in terms of the bar animation as you have less remaining time. But these 4 healing spells, Renewing Mist, Vivify, Enveloping Mist, and Soothing Mist, this is going to be what makes up the vast majority of your healing in a dungeon. So as you can see, Vivify is 4th. Invigorating Mist, this is basically the cleave heal that makes Vivify heals all the Renewing Mist targets. Enveloping Mist is also healing for a ton, but remember that we're applying Enveloping Mist through Soothing Mist, but Soothing Mist itself does not actually heal for a lot. However, there is one very important thing about Soothing Mist, and that it gives you and the target you're channeling on a 6% damage reduction. Now this is not really that much in lower keys, but I have seen this on many occasions. I channel Soothing Mist on a tank or someone that I think is about to take a ton of damage, and they live with like a percent health left. That means that the Soothing Mist 6% DR was actually enough in that instance to make the difference. Now there's a few things on the healing breakdown here that we have not talked about yet. Let's start with Gust of Mist. So Gust of Mist is your mastery. All it is that whenever you cast a heal, another heal is cast. You don't think about it, it just happens. It's not a proc, it's a guarantee. Every time you cast a heal, the class just casts another heal on the target. Now this will be at near the top of your healing meters most of the time, just because it's guaranteed, it's always happening. Every heal is giving you a Gust of Mist. Now at the very top, Ancient Teachings, this is a baseline passive for all Mistweaver monks, and it means that 30% of your damage from every damaging spell you have besides Spinning Crane Kick, 30% of your damage heals allies, and this is smart healing. So it will always prioritize healing the most injured person. If you look at the targets of my Ancient Teachings here, you can see Azzy on the meters here is the person that's healed the most by it, because that's the tank. And the tank is more likely to be not at full HP whenever I'm hitting the mobs. Zen Pulse here is another thing from Vivify. So far we have Vivify, Invigorating Mist, and Zen Pulse, and this is all just from Vivify. And then Strength of the Black Ox is from Enveloping Mist. So this is a proc in your hero talent tree, and basically whenever you Vivify or Tiger Palm, you have a chance to call a dog. After you call the dog, it empowers your next Enveloping Mist, and it reduces the cast time by half, and it puts an Absorb Shield on everyone around you. This is the only time that you will ever hard cast an Enveloping Mist. So your two ways to cast Enveloping Mist are going to be through Soothing Mist or when you get a proc that makes it cast faster. And this will be something that you'll want your UI to track, but any Mistweaver Monk UI that's been made and published is going to have tracking for this. Baseline, it's a very, very basic thing to track. All right, so we've gone over the rotational healing abilities and the rotational damage abilities. You understand that Renewing Mist is your basic hot, Vivify cleaves through Renewing Mist, and Enveloping Mist is your big expensive hot that's a healing amp provider. And that right there is the core of Mistweaver healing, and those spells are the only spells you're going to use to heal. There is an honorary mention, and it's Expel Harm. So Expel Harm is a simple 15-second cooldown spell that just heals you for quite a lot. It's also very cheap mana cost-wise. Now, it does say 20% of the damage or 25% of the damage that you heal is nature damage. Ignore that. Never, ever use this for damage because it's only the effective healing, meaning when you're more injured, then it'll deal damage. But if you're pressing Expel Harm, this is like the first thing you press before you want to health pot, and it's sort of like your personal monk health pot. Don't think about the damage part of this, only use it for healing yourself, and again, it's the first thing you press whenever you're injured. And there's a basic rule of thumb I use for these simple rotational abilities in terms of learning when you would cast them. Basically, you cast Renewing Mist on cooldown on any target that will ever take damage. So anyone in the group, you cast Renewing Mist on cooldown. You also, whether you're healing or DPSing, whichever one you want to be doing at the moment, you Rushing Wind Kick on cooldown. Rushing Wind Kick interacts with this capstone and it extends all your hots. And also remember, it's also applying an automatic Renewing Mist cast. So you Renewing Mist on anyone in the party, and then you Rushing Wind Kick on cooldown because you wanted to extend those Renewing Mists and keep them up. If anyone takes damage and needs healing now, simply Vivify them. Doesn't matter who it is, cast Vivify. Now, if someone isn't taking damage right now and they don't need a Vivify, but you know damage is coming, that's when you'll enter Soothing Mist and start putting out Enveloping Mists on the people that you think will be taking damage very shortly. This makes it so that when the damage starts and you have to start Vivifying, you have a ton of hots out and you have a ton of healing amps out, and just basically your Vivify is healing for considerably more than it would normally. Because you've Renewing Misted on cooldown and Rushing Wind Kick on cooldown, it's cleaving to the entire party whenever you Vivify once. But that fundamental gameplay of Renewing Mist targets that you think will ever take damage, Enveloping Mist if you think they'll take damage soon, and Vivify if they've taken damage and need healing now, and then of course Expel Harm yourself if ever you need to heal yourself. That fundamental will never be broken no matter what you're playing with this build. That will always be how you heal on a very, very basic level. Now let's talk about your cooldowns, because this is really the strength of this build, and the strength of Mistweaver Monk is the cooldowns. Now, firstly, your simplest and single target cooldown is Life Cocoon. This puts a big ball around the person and gives them a very sizable Absorb Shield, in addition to also applying your Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist to this target. While you will mostly cast Life Cocoon on the tank, besides Resto Shamans who literally don't have a tank defensive, it might be the second worst class at tank defensives. Now, it's important to remember that because Life Cocoon is an Absorb, you're most likely going to want to use it proactively, meaning just before the damage comes out, you put it on someone and then the damage goes into the Absorb Shield. And an example of a really good cocoon use is first season of War Within. I can look at these 4 mobs ahead of me here and see that they're all casting on the Demon Hunter. So I queue into that, I mouse over the Demon Hunter, and I cast Life Cocoon with about 0.1 seconds left on each one of these shots. And the way my UI works is this gray area here means that they have an Absorb that is worth the full HP of the target. 0.1 seconds after I cast it, the Absorb is almost entirely gone, meaning that this person would have taken their health down to about 15-20% here had I not cocooned them prior. Which is really important that I cocooned them prior, because as you see here, the snipers are starting to cast on that target again immediately, meaning they're going to take more damage very soon, but because of the cocoon, they probably didn't even notice that they took any damage at all. Now, the next cooldown you have is Shayloon's Gift. You'll notice Shayloon's Gift tooltip doesn't say it has a cooldown. As you spend time in combat and you look around you, you'll see these clouds start to appear, and also the Shayloon Gift button or your weak auras that you're choosing to use will have a count on Shayloon that's going up. Shayloon's heals for more up to 10 clouds, and it heals the entire party with this build. So it's effectively a 40-second cooldown because it takes 4 seconds for one cloud to appear, and then you can consume all 10 at once. But Shaylun is a very, very simple ability to use at its core. Basically, if the entire party needs healing and you have more than, I'd say, 6 stacks of Shaylun's gift, press it and it heals the entire group. Note that you can opt sometimes to hold Shaylun or let it even get to 10 stacks, because maybe your rotational spells are just doing enough and you don't need that burst to all targets. But Shaylun is going to be your fastest way to heal all 5 targets at once, besides your next reactive cooldown, that is Revival, or Restoral, depending on which one you choose. This season, you can always go with Revival. Revival dispels poison, disease, and magic, but Restoral only dispels poison and disease in addition to healing a ton to the entire group. The reason you'd even make this choice is because sometimes in a dungeon, it can be bad to dispel at a certain time, and you want to be able to Revival and heal everyone without having to be concerned about dispelling at an inopportune time. But this season, as far as I can tell, there are no dungeons that have any dispel that you can do at a particularly bad time. And most of the time, it's actually the opposite. There's a ton of magic dispels in this season, and Revival will help you in giving you once per 3 minutes a way to dispel the entire group and more or less top them all to full. And now you have one more major cooldown, then 2 sort of mini cooldowns. The major cooldown is Yu'lon. Yu'lon doesn't change your rotation at all. You keep doing as you've done before. You renewing mist on the entire party, you enveloping mist when people are taking damage, you soothing mist to enter an enveloping mist channel to the entire party, and you vivify people that need help. Yu'lon just makes it better. Now, Yu'lon has a lot of talent nodes that make up for what it actually does, but TLDR for Yu'lon is it halves the mana cost of your Enveloping Mist, making it very, very efficient. It makes Enveloping Mist cleave healing to all the targets around you, and when you summon Yu'lon, it puts a big Absorb Shield on everyone that when the Absorb Shield finishes, automatically casts Enveloping Mist on every single target. Now, most of Yu'lon's interactions cap out at 5 targets, but it's really good for you because you only have 5 people in a dungeon. So when you pop Yu'lon, you'll see lots of animations will start, and as you start channeling and putting out Enveloping Mists, Yu'lon will breathe its breath on all the targets around, and you can see a ton of healing is happening, but that's pretty much how Yu'lon works. It's a rotation enhancer. There is no like Yu'lon specific rotation in dungeon. So the damage starts, you press Yu'lon, and then you go into a Soothing Mist channel and start applying Enveloping Mist to get a bunch of healing out. When all the Enveloping Mists are out, is when you would Rushing Wind Kick, because this extends all your hots, and even the free Yu'lon Enveloping Mists are considered hots that can be extended by this. And then you would just go back to vivifying people as they need help, or keeping up your dots as you see fit. And also, the fourth cooldown that I almost entirely forgot to talk about is your hero talents, Celestial Conduit. Very important. This also does a ton of things, but the TLDR is that it heals everyone around you, and it deals damage to everyone around you. Now, for some reason, all your heals are 40 yards, Celestial Conduit's 20 yards. So you have to be very, very close. But you can see if you get in close here, and I get in combat, and I Celestial Conduit, it is a channel, and it's pulsing. If these guys were my allies in my party, it would be healing them, and it also pulses quite a lot of damage. Now, Conduit has a ton of interactions, and there are different procs depending on the 3 Monk Celestials that you call throughout. At a basic level, I think you actually don't pay attention to these. The only one you care about is Strength of the Black Ox. Whenever that's up is when you can cast an Enveloping Mist. That's a very fast cast, and it puts the Absorb on everyone. When you're in Conduit, you can press the Conduit button again to call all these Celestials. Do that as soon as possible. So basically, when you activate Conduit, you press it again, and you'll see all the different farm animals come out, and they do their thing. Now, the 2 mini cooldowns I talked about previously are your Ts. You have 2 of them, Thunder Focus Tea and Mana Tea. Firstly, Thunder Focus Tea is very simple. It's a 30-second cooldown, and note that 30 seconds is divisible by the 2 minutes of Yu'lon. Thunder Focus Tea buffs your next spell that you press after from the list of spells in the tooltip, and also because of this talent down here, it gives you 15% of a stat. You will always want to use this on Renewing Mist. It gives you a much longer Renewing Mist, making it easier to maintain it on the group, and it gives you 15% haste, which is your best stat. Now, your goal should always be Thunder Focus Tea, immediately Renewing Mist. As you get advanced in the class, and I'll talk about that in the more advanced version of this, there are ways to use the other spells that could be good, but if you use those improperly or at the wrong time, it's considerably worse than just sending it on Renewing Mist. Definitely just Thunder Focus Tea and Renewing Mist all the time. And this is sort of a mini cooldown because 15% haste is not a lot, and haste is your best stat as this class, so 15% of your best stat, a stat that I only have 30% of right now, basically giving me 50% more haste for a few seconds is very valuable, and it does feel like a cooldown. Now, Thunder Focus Tea also has a bonus effect that occurs no matter what spell you use, and actually it occurs on the initial part of Thunder Focus Tea before you've even spent a spell. And that is that whenever you use Thunder Focus Tea, it empowers your next Crackling Jade Lightning, and now this is the only circumstance that you actually press Crackling Jade Lightning. Because as you can see here, it does quite a lot of damage. And it makes your Crackling Jade Lightning cleave, however, doing much less damage to the other cleave targets. It's mainly a single target nuke. Now, these Crackling Jade Lightning empowerments do not have a cooldown, but they have a max stack of 2, meaning every second time you Thunder Focus Tea, you want to Crackling Jade Lightning at the slowest. Ideally, you would do it very shortly after if you don't have any healing to do immediately. But also remember, because of your baseline passive, Crackling Jade Lightning doing these millions of damage is actually healing people around you. Now, it's not a lot, especially with this build. It's mostly for damage, but just know that there is some healing going out as well, which means you can use it when you're under pressure. Now, the next mini cooldown is Mana Tea. So Mana Tea is very simple. As you spend mana, you gain the stacks of Mana Tea, and then you can consume Mana Tea to regen some of your mana. And then also, based on how much mana you regen, you get a certain time of 30% reduced mana costs. So you can see I'm at 1.2 million mana, which is just about half. I consume Mana Tea, gets me up to 1.8, and then now I have 10 seconds of 30% less mana cost. This means that you don't want to use Mana Tea like water. Like, you don't want to use Mana Tea out of combat. If you're out of combat, simply sit and drink. But you do want to use Mana Tea as you need mana in combat, and especially before you have a heavy period of healing. So as you can see here, every time I Enveloping Mist, I basically lose about 100,000 mana on my mana indicator in the center here. However, if I was to Mana Tea, get a whole bunch back at 1.8 now, then if I Enveloping Mist, you can see now it's like roughly every second or third Enveloping Mist is taking me down 100,000 mana. So that 30% does not sound like a lot, but it actually is quite a lot. Now that you know how all the spells work, let's talk about what it would look like in practice before I break down some gameplay. So when you're rolling up to a pack of mobs, always keep Renewing Misting on your party, and then Rushing Wind Kick is the first thing you press before you Blackout Kick to try to get a reset. If you don't get a reset, then you would Tiger Palm, and then Rushing Wind Kick when it comes back off, then Blackout Kick. You see I do get a reset here. And basically the more Rushing Wind Kick resets you get, the more damage you'll do at the start of a pull. But remembering to always keep Renewing Misting your friendlies that don't have Renewing Mist on them at that time. Then when healing is required, I will Thunder Focus Tea, set out a Renewing Mist to give me a ton of haste, and then I will either Vivify if people just took an instance of damage, or if sustained damage is coming out, I'll enter Soothing Mist, and then go target to target that I think is going to take damage soon, and Enveloping Mist. And at the end of that, hit our Wind Kick again to extend it all. And as you'll see, a ton of healing is going out baseline right now, but you're always remembering to, no matter what's going on, Renewing Mist on cooldown and Rushing Wind Kick on cooldown. Then if people are taking more damage, you have options. If it's just one instance, you can Shaylun to pulse a big amount of healing to each person in the group. If it's sustained damage, you can Conduit to do a pulsing amount of AoE healing and damage throughout that entire channel. If the damage is even continuing, or if you went into the pull knowing the damage starts quickly, you can Yulon. Always combine Thunder Focus Tea and Renewing Mist with Yulon. Then you start spreading your Enveloping Mists. Wind Kicking on cooldown always. Blackout Kick if you have a free global to try to reset Wind Kick. Vivify people that need help. And you can see just doing these things, and then Shaylun will come back off cooldown. And then maybe I get a few seconds here. I can start a Crackling Jade Lightning channel. And as you can see, millions of HPS just doing the basic core of keeping Renewing Mist up. Thunder Focus Tea with Renewing Mist, vivifying people who need healing, and watching that when you vivify someone, the entire party or everyone that has Renewing Mist on them also gets vivified, Enveloping Mist when I get the proc, and so on and so on, and it just loops basically like this forever. And remember, if ever you need healing specifically, Expel Harm. If the group takes damage and you're panicking and you're freaking out, Revival, big 3-minute cooldown, will heal everyone for millions. But now let's look at how that looks actually in combat. And I know that's a lot, slow it down, replay it, but this is just a breakdown. That's how the thought process should go in combat. Now, when you apply this thinking into a very difficult pull, this was on the first couple days of the season, this is what it looks like. So I go into the pull knowing that this guy, this mini boss, does a ton of damage. So as I said before, I Enveloping Mist on people that are going to take damage soon, which is literally the entire party. Now the goal here is basically to get everyone healthy enough, or keep them healthy, such that I can apply Enveloping Mist to get all the healing bonuses, which will make it easier in turn to get them healthy again, and then you just continue that cycle forever. So I start with Yulon here, and then I enter a channel and start doing Enveloping Mists almost immediately. And then if anyone ever falls to like a point where I think they will die in a few seconds, I'll then Vivify them to top them up immediately, before getting a few seconds here of the entire group being healthy to go do a Rushing Wind Kick into a Spinning Crane Kick. And then as I come down to the end of my Yulon window, I Mana Tea to make sure I'm conserving a little bit of mana. I get a few seconds here to do a Crackling Jade Lightning, get some damage out, get myself on the board. And then sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation like this where your Yulon just ended. You now have to figure out what cooldown is coming next. I don't have Thunder Focus Tea up for quite a while, so I'm basically stuck with my base kit right now. And you'll find yourself basically having to spam Vivify because you see I do have a ton of healing amps on the entire group from the end of the Yulon window. Moments like this, it's perfect for when you want a Shayloon's gift. So you can see Vivify will almost always top the person up that you're healing, but Shayloon gifts gives you a brief second where the entire party is top. And then as the damage continues, I Conduit here. You see Conduit almost entirely cancels out the damage. And then as this boss comes to a close, I know that I can then go into a channel and start using expensive things just to get us over the boss without having to commit Revival or without having to commit a Cocoon. Because obviously, right now, my only point is to sit down and drink for a second because I don't want to consume the mana T stacks I have because I know that there's a lot more AoE damage coming up. So this is a successful high HPS mini boss where I basically use 2 cooldowns. I have 3 cooldowns still up. Revival, Shayloon's coming up in a second. Thunder Focus Tea is coming up very soon, and I still have Life Cocoon up. And this is basically what you want to be at. Note that if you ever go into a pull not having any cooldowns, be prepared to be burning through mana and having to mana tea very, very frequently. Because as you consume more mana, you generate more mana tea, and as you generate more mana tea, you can consume it to get more mana discounts, and it's sort of a positive feedback loop. But note that whenever you generate a mana tea, you have spent 4 times that amount, so every 4 mana generates 1 mana worth of mana tea. So it will slowly decrease over time, and you will eventually get to 0 mana. But in like 4+ minute fights, basically what will happen is your cooldowns come back, and things like Yulon, Celestial Conduit, and Shayloon are very mana efficient for the amount of healing they do. And another really high HPS boss is this third boss in Dark Flame Cleft. But this boss has a really nice visual indicator in that every statue that's out is more group damage being taken, and then the targeted circles do a big hit to those specific people. So you can look around the room and count the amount of statues and see how much damage the group is taking. So early on in this fight, I never want to commit a ton of cooldowns because I know that someone will miss statues and we will have situations where you are required to do more healing than the fight designer intended. And then you also know that you might accidentally roll into a statue here and get stunned for 6 seconds for no reason. That just sometimes might happen. But you can see here I'm at about 66% mana when the cast goes off and we all get feared, which is delightful. But one thing to note here is you can see I drink, again, to not waste mana tea stacks out of combat. I start the boss fight at about like 80-90% mana, and then I heal for about 2.25 million HPS throughout this entire boss. Not done terribly, all things considered. This number can easily go up into the 3 or 4 million HPS range. But I start at 80 or 90% mana, and I end at 50% mana. But that's kind of by choice, because at the end here, I don't want to commit more cooldowns. Whenever the fight's ending or the pull's ending, you don't really need to commit cooldowns. You just need to heal everyone enough to get them over the bump of the pull ending. But here, just the boss is at 20% and I'm basically at 75% mana. And then as the fight's ending, I care less and less about mana because now the boss is at 5% and I'm at 60% mana. There's just tons more mana than there is boss health, so which is pretty good for the mana economy. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is your utility and defensives. So Monk has a ton of utility, and the class tree has a ton of choices, but you should honestly come to your own conclusions because there are like 70 different class trees that 70 different monks will be running. And it all depends on what you want and what you need in a certain comp. Or as you get more experience in the class, you can just start reading the tooltips a little bit more and there might just be things you want. Like maybe you want to go cheat torpedo, so your roll is a different roll. Maybe you want your roll to go slightly farther because that just feels better for you. It's totally up to you with a lot of these things. I'm just going to talk about the main utility and defensives that you use inside dungeons. So firstly, this Jade Serpent statue, you put it down and it stays there for 15 minutes and it's got like a 50-ish yard range. The way this works is whenever you soothing mist someone, it also soothing mists, but this is just passive free healing, and it also is a really nice visual indicator to people that they're being healed because there's a giant mist drawing a line across their screen. Now, Monk has a ton of movement, of course. You have Tiger's Lust that you can cast on yourself or an ally, frees you from roots or slows, and it also makes you go pretty fast. Note that Tiger's Lust is also a 20-yard range, which is very odd that there are things with 25-yard ranges, 20-yard ranges, 40-yard ranges. Who really knows what the designers are doing? Now, after you roll, you can double press spacebar to do a little Fell Rush, a little Demon Hunter Fell Rush here. This is really, really good for counteracting not only fall damage, but also knockbacks. So basically, let's pretend this is a boss knocking me back. I can roll and double tap spacebar and I reverse the momentum back to where I came from. So again, you get knocked back, you're going in this direction, you roll, double tap spacebar, and you're back in whatever direction you want. But it's also especially nice for whenever bosses require movement, because let's say you're here and you have to move towards the statue, you can roll, and then if you have to move back, you can hold the double tap for a few seconds and then use that to get the other direction without having to use another roll. And your last bit of movement is Transcendence. This is more advanced, so you might not use this at the start, and that's totally okay. But a really good use of it is in this candle area in Dark Flame Cleft. I will often Transcendence on the cart, go somewhere and get a far candle, and then take my Transcendence back. And it's just little things like that that make your movement a little bit easier, but you have to pre-plan. You can't Transcendence forward. You have to have gone to the location you're going back to. Now, there is a choice node at the bottom here. You can take a point out of the statue if you don't want it to get this choice node. Now, this lets you choose between Transcendence transferring again. So basically, I can put my Transcendence down, transfer, and then transfer back. Also, you can make it as a buff to an ally. So instead of putting the little clone down, it will buff an ally, and then the Transcendence transfer button will send you to that ally, providing they're within 40 yards. And then I think that's it for all your movement abilities. The other thing to note is that when you're in Celestial Conduit, you are going quite a bit faster, and you also can roll and also double jump roll in Celestial Conduit. Additionally, you can cast any utility ability in Celestial Conduit, as you'll see. Anything that does no damage or no healing, so no throughput, it's just a utility button, it's usable during Conduit without canceling the Conduit channel. Now for your actual crowd controls, your most famous crowd control is Leg Sweep. This is very simple. It's an AoE stun, and it stuns all the mobs around for quite a long time. Now Touch of Death is a button you have as well that's technically a damaging ability, but I think about it more as utility. So for example, if you're in a dungeon and this mob is lower than your own HP, and it's casting, you can do something like this, where you Touch of Death to instantly kill the mob and prevent that cast, and it's used more like utility. It also has a bonus in that it gives you 5% more damage done for 30 seconds after you use it. But very frequently in packs, I will be aiming to Touch of Death the mob that's low HP that's about to start a new cast, sort of like a pseudo interrupt. And speaking of interrupt, your interrupt is unfortunately a true melee range, meaning you need to be actually inside the mob. You can see that's the distance to interrupt the mob. That's why, even though this is the range build, you want to find your way back to melee. Like let's say I'm going out here to hit a mob and then to cast a heal on someone, but this mob is casting. I always very frequently roll back in just so I can get the interrupt off. Another way to stop mobs that are casting is to Ring of Peace. Note that Ring of Peace will knock mobs always outward. So if I use it in the middle of these guys here, you see they both get knocked in opposite directions, but they will try to go back to where they want to go, whether that's the tank that they have aggro on or their neutral position if they're mobs that you haven't pulled yet. Now, Ring of Peace will not put you in combat, so you can use it to stop a patrol or to knock mobs away for a skip. But if you are using Ring of Peace for a skip, you usually pair it with Paralysis to stop the mobs from trying to revert back to their position. You can do that two ways. You can Paralysis first, then Ring of Peace, which is usually safer. So you pair, this will not put you in combat, and then you can Ring of Peace to move the mob. And this basically gives your team a full minute of Paralysis to get past wherever you have to go. But however, note that you can only have Paralysis on one mob at a time. If for whatever reason you have to use it on another mob, if I para this mob, it frees up this other mob, but as you can see, it does not put you in combat. Now, Paralysis has a double use in that it also soothes and rage effects, but it has a 30-second cooldown, which is a very long cooldown for a soothe. So you can use it to soothe and rage effects, and you sometimes have to, but it isn't like your primary soothe in a dungeon. It's not replacing a druid or a hunter by any means. Ring of Peace has an interesting way to stop a lot of casts. If ever you're pulling a pack and you're up against the wall here, you can Ring of Peace against the wall, and they will basically infinitely bounce up and down on the Ring of Peace as they're trying to get between the wall and where they want to go. This stops them from casting the entire time, but note that Ring of Peace, when they land, they'll instantly start back whatever cast. It's not putting any casts on cooldown for 90% of the mobs in the dungeon pool right now. And then last bit of utility you have is your Dispel. Your Dispel removes magic, poison, and disease, and it's exactly the same things that Revival removes. So you can Revival if multiple people in the group need dispelling, or you can single target dispel if that's working better for you. Note that Revival still has a 3-minute cooldown, so don't Revival to dispel one person, single dispel that person, or you can even elect to heal them through it if the dot is not that bad or not that long lasting. But on a lot of bosses, like this IPA boss in Cinderbrew Meadery, sometimes you just have bad overlaps and you don't really want to commit a lot of cooldowns whenever these debuffs come out. So I'll wait for both debuffs to land and then immediately Revival, which basically gives me a few seconds of no one taking any damage at all. And it's really nice for moments like these where you can tell the tank wants to reposition. But otherwise, what I do on these dots is I dispel one and then I focus heal the other person to keep them nice and healthy. And then the final two spells we'll talk about are your defensives. You have two of them, Diffuse Magic and Fort Brew. Fort Brew simply gives you more health and makes you take less damage by the same amount. By default, it's 20% more health and 20% less damage, and also turns you into a stone guy. Through this talent note here, it also makes Fort Brew give you 25% max health as a shield, which is pretty nice. And then your biggest defensive and one of the strongest defensives in the game is Diffuse Magic. This is a whopping 60% magic damage reduction that also tries to return any magic debuffs you have to their caster, as you see at the tooltip there, if possible. What this means is that if a boss applies a debuff to you and someone else in the party, and it's magical, you can manually dispel the other person, then diffuse magic yourself to return the debuff to the boss. Now, diffuse magic will try to reflect the debuff. It won't always work. It will always dispel you, but it won't always deal damage back. Sometimes, though, you diffuse magic a debuff and it actually goes back to the mob and deals heavy damage back to them, and that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's basically it. I think there's no way you watch this and you don't know what any of the spells do now. We've covered literally every single thing. You know about your damage rotation. You know that you have to wind kick, blackout kick when wind kicks on cooldown, and then tiger palm if you want a blackout kick and that's on cooldown. You know that when you go into a pull, you renewing mist. If people are ever going to take damage, which is everyone in the group, you enveloping mist in the soothing mist channel. If you think they're going to take damage in the next few seconds and you want the healing amps, or you enveloping mist when you get a strength of the Black Ox proc, which makes it cast not very slow. You simply vivify when people need healing, and then you can weave in your cooldowns such as conduit, or revival for a big heal, or cocoon for a big shield, or Yulon for whenever you're doing your base rotation, but you just need a little bit more juice during it. But yeah, now I think you should be able to go watch the other guide and understand everything perfectly fine. And I might do another more advanced guide talking about much more min-maxy things that I omitted in this beginner guide. Let me know if you want to do that. Hopefully you enjoyed the build. Let me know thoughts. That's all for now. Later.